My search to find the greatest film of all time moves deeper into the 80s. Today I rank all the films I've seen from 1982. Welcome to my ranking of films which came out in the year 1982, or at least the ones that I've seen. And on that note, I can declare that I have seen 20 films from this particular year. That total was about 13 this time last week. I've watched a lot of films from 1982 over the past 7 days just to bump up today's numbers. Interestingly, there are a lot of non-horror films today, especially compared with the 1981 ranking. I would say that there are comfortably more non-horror films than horror films on today's ranking. Now, just a quick reminder that the top film today will go through to the grand final of 100 films later down the line, where I will be declaring once and for all what the greatest film of all time is. The film which comes second today will also be in that grand final, numbers permitting. So let's get into it then and find out what is my 20th and therefore least favourite movie which came out in 1982. New York Ripper was a first-time watch for me and also a last-time watch for me because I will never be putting this one on again. It reminds me a lot of Maniac, which came bottom of the 81 rankings, in that they're both low-rent, sleazy, bottom-of-the-barrel slasher films. They're not very good. It felt to me during this movie that I was spending more time watching middle-aged women rub themselves to orgasm than I was actually watching detectives chasing killers. It's really bad. The whole thing took me 3 sittings to get through. I just couldn't do it in one session. And the only reason I kept watching was because I thought to myself, well, I've wasted this much time on it. I'm going to at least finish it so I can include it on the ranking. But it's just an awful, awful horror film. Avoid at all costs. This one at least has some historical and cultural significance in the movie world, but I still don't like it. I think it came out slightly too early for me. I was born in 1980. This obviously came out in 82. I wouldn't have been aware of it when it came out, being only 2 years old. By the time I got to sort of 6, 7 years old as the 80s wore on, and which would have been the sort of age that I could have got into E.T., I'd already moved into things like Terminator and Rambo. You know, I got into violent movies, adult movies quite young, so E.T. was just never on my radar. When I finally got around to watching it, I think when I was about 10, I finally sat through it one day when it was on TV. I thought it was so sickly sweet. I just wanted to puke. Honestly, it really wasn't my thing. Do people even still watch this these days? Because my kids have never touched it. They're 10, 9 and 5, my kids, and I bet they've never even heard of E.T. I've certainly not mentioned it. So in my book, this is not one of Spielberg's best. This is a horror anthology film which has such a good reputation that when it came to watching it for the first time last week, I deliberately saved it for my late Friday night slot, which is my absolute best movie watching time of the week. It's when I get beers out for the first time after 5 days of hard work. I've got to say, I did not enjoy it. It's not like I don't appreciate these sorts of films. I'm a big Amicus fan. I do like horror anthologies when they're done well. But out of the 5 stories in this film, I only really enjoyed one of them, which is the one with Stephen King, where he's growing fungus on his face. I think that was actually quite terrific. The art department did an amazing job in that one. But the other 4 were really throwaway. There's no decent wraparound story to go with the whole thing. And I've got to say, this is not one that I will ever be going back to. This is one I have an interesting connection to because even though I don't like musicals, when I was going through my theatre acting stage in my mid-20s, I just happened to be in a production of Annie. I had a small role. I was playing a policeman. I only had 3 speaking lines in the whole thing, which was still quite nerve-wracking given that the crowds were like typically 400 or 500 people a night. So basically my scene was to walk onto stage as a copper, and Annie had run away from home at this point of the story, and I just had to sort of glance at her and go, hello, 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 what do you think you're doing out at this time of night then, or something like that. And then I had another couple of lines after that. and then I had to lead Annie off stage, and that was me done. That was my part finished. Me and a friend who was also in the production, we watched the movie around about that time just to kind of prepare ourselves for the roles, I suppose. I've never gone back to this film ever since that production wrapped, but I can sort of still hear one or two of the songs in my head, things like Hard Knock Life, etc., etc. And I have a touch of sentimentality when it comes to Annie, though I don't actually really like it that much. 17th is about right. This is probably the lowest I've ever put a Clint Eastwood film on one of my rankings. I only watched this for the first time last week. I rented it on Amazon Prime. My dad used to have it on home video back in the day, but I never took the chance to watch it back then. It's kind of a tale of two halves, this. So in the first half, Eastwood's character is deep undercover in Mother Russia, trying to steal an aircraft from a military base, and the KGB are trailing him the whole time. It's a very espionage type deal, very Harry Palmer-ish in its feel. I liked that half of the movie. But then once Eastwood steals the aircraft, we've still got 40, 45 minutes left at that point, and the whole thing becomes very Top Gun-ish, and Russian fighter pilots are going after him, and there's all this crazy aerial dogfighting going on. I've never been into that type of action in cinema. So the second half of the film was a bit of a drag. If the whole thing had been like the first half, I probably would have enjoyed this a lot more. As it is, it's definitely a one and done for me. There are far better standalone Clint Eastwood thrillers out there. Out of all the films today, this is the one I had the most trouble remembering. In fact, I had to go on Wiki and sort of remind myself of the plot. I only saw this once. It was a long time ago when I was a teenager. I remember it being really good. I just don't think that this is the sort of film that is that rewatchable. I mean, it's not like I'm going to come home after a hard day's work and think, oh, I've got to put a film on, kick back and relax. What shall I watch? Oh, Gandhi. No, it's just not going to happen, is it? But it's a good film, though. You know, this is real history reenacted on film. It's important history. I think it's definitely worth at least one watch, and we're definitely getting to the good part of the ranking. I think all the films from here onwards are very good. Now, I just said that I struggled to remember this film a little bit. There was another film which I was really struggling to remember, which I've not included today, called An Officer and a Gentleman. I'm sure I've seen that, but I can't remember anything apart from the ending where the guy carries the girl off. So there's one example where I've considered putting a film on the ranking, but ultimately decided that it wouldn't quite be justified. It wouldn't be fair. I'd just be pretending that I have a good knowledge of it when I don't. But in the case of Gandhi, I remember enough to be able to include it. Rocky 3 is fine. It's good, harmless popcorn entertainment. I've seen it several times throughout my life, just like I have the vast majority of other Rocky films. In this particular one, I like the fact that Rocky makes friends with Apollo. I think that was an interesting direction to take the story in. But ultimately, when I compare this to the vast majority of other films on this ranking, they have far more originality and creativity going on in them. There's a lot of repetition in the Rocky franchise. When you boil it down, this story is just Rocky taking on one more challenger and knocking him out. Happy ending, but it's still good fun. This is a sort of swords and sorcery film which I covered in my fairly recent Arnold Schwarzenegger film rankings. I do get some crossover sometimes in the various rankings that I do. This is a fairly competent hack 'em up starring a very young Arnold Schwarzenegger in the days before he became the world-class actor that we know and love today. I've seen it about 3 times in total, roughly. The last of those times was a long, long time ago now. I'm definitely due another watch of this and Conan the Destroyer. They're both pretty decent. The first one is especially violent and gory. That might be my favourite of the two, but like I said, I desperately need to go back to them. It's been too long. Same genre as Conan, I guess, although this would just about be my preferred choice of the two. I've got a funny story when it comes to my relationship with this movie because when I was young, we somehow ended up with about 20 minutes of this taped onto home video. I don't know why we didn't get the whole film, but the 20 minutes we just happened to get were brilliant, full of action. I absolutely loved it. I'm not sure if it was the last 20 minutes of the movie or at some point before then in the runtime. I just know that I loved this one little segment of the movie that I possessed, and it left me wondering what the rest of the movie could possibly hold. As it turned out, a lot of the rest of the movie was quite tame, but the overall film is still pretty good. I'd totally forgotten that Tanya Roberts was in the film until I randomly was looking it up just the other day. I think there are sequels to this. I've not seen those, but yeah, it's a good movie. It's definitely one of the better of these type of films that I've seen. This is a classic film. I saw it several times when I was growing up on TV. These days, I own a DVD copy. I'll bung it on every sort of 5 or 6 years. It's a film I hugely respect. I'm a big gamer when I'm not doing this, so anytime you put people inside a video game in a film, then that will appeal to me, no matter how old that video game now looks. I do feel like this film could have been even better, though. As good an achievement as it was technically back in '82, I do feel like they took their eye off the ball when it came to the characters and the relationships between the characters. I mean, I've seen this film multiple times and I couldn't tell you anything about any of the characters. I think if Tron had had compelling characters like you see in the adventures in Star Wars and the Goonies, that kind of thing, this could have been one of the all-time greats from the period. As it is, it's a bit of an acquired taste, this film, and it wouldn't really appeal to younger people these days. I think they'd take a look at the graphics and think, ooh, not sure about that. So for a certain generation, it's a classic film, but I think it's about right that it's not quite made today's top 10. This was one of my first time watches, and it was one of the better ones, it has to be said. It reminds me of another Argento film, Deep Red. I think I actually prefer Deep Red to this, but I certainly had a good time watching this Gallo film play out. I had no idea who the killer was going to be. There were a number of red herrings. My mind was going all over the place trying to work out who it was. There were a number of good suspenseful situations. My personal favourite is when the girl is getting chased by the dog and she ends up at the killer's house. The final shot in the movie is a little bit cheesy. It doesn't quite match up to the quality of everything else leading up to that, but on the whole, it's a good film. John Saxon's in it as well. I keep discovering new films that just happen to have John Saxon in recently. It's a weird thing. This was one of the first violent films I ever saw. It was either this or Terminator that was the first. I can't remember which. My mum went through a phase of renting Stallone movies in the middle of the '80s. I guess she had a thing for him. And she let me watch these films with her. And she always used to say to me at the start of each one, now it's just tomato ketchup you're going to see in this film. It's not blood. And I was like, yeah, yeah. Weird thing is, though, we always used to call these films Rambo 1 and Rambo 2. We never called them First Blood 1 and First Blood 2. It's a little bit weird. And another weird thing is the fact that even though this is probably technically the best in the franchise, the first one, I find the sequels much more rewatchable, more entertaining. I mean, this first film has the best story. It's the only film that has something to say in terms of how we treat returning veterans, that kind of thing. But I prefer the sequels, in all honesty. I'd have a really hard time ranking the Rambo films. I'll do it at some point, I'll give it a shot, but I don't know how I'm going to put the first film against the other four because they're completely different beasts. So yeah, I like the first Rambo film. I like it. It sort of has a special place in my heart because I watched it so young. I wouldn't say that I completely love it though, or that it's one of my all-time greats. Like Gandhi, this is one I've not seen in a long, long time, and as such, I had to really strain my memory to remember some of the things which happened during the story. When I was a teenager, I'm sure I had a bit of a crush on the mother in this film. It's weird to think that I'm probably older now than she was during this film. I've probably seen part two as well, but I don't remember it at all, so I'm not going to be able to include that in the rankings for whatever year that came out in, unless I rewatch it between now and then. Number three I can remember because that's the one that involves the mirrors. It doesn't have the greatest of reputations, that one, but I remember enjoying it. The fourth one, the remake, I've not seen that one at all. It has a horrible reputation, but at some point I would like to do a full series rewatch and possibly reviews. It's been way too long since I've seen any of these. And it was a real shame what happened to the little girl who was in the first three movies. I believe she died very shortly after doing part three, and she was only about 12 years old at the time. I think her name was Heather O'Rourke. She did some great stuff in these movies, and it was such a sad passing. I like the Death Wish films probably more than I should. To use the old cheeseburger analogy, trashy food, but it tastes good. These films remind me of the Streets of Rage 4 video game, which I've been playing this week on my PS4, except in the case of Death Wish, the protagonist uses a gun. These films are just Charles Bronson going around blowing away loads of hoodlums and punks who have absolutely got it coming to them. They're just good, fun films. You can turn your brain off and have fun. Death Wish 2 was the first one that I ever saw. I can remember feeling a little bit freaked out by how violent some of the early scenes were. Distant memories now, but all five of these films, to me, are really enjoyable. I'm ashamed to say that even though I'm a massive fan of the Halloween franchise, I ignored this film for over 20 years just because it didn't have Michael Myers in. And then when I finally gave it a chance, I felt embarrassed and disappointed in myself because I'd left it that long. Because it's a good film. It's better than some of the ones with Michael Myers in. Tom Atkins is brilliant in the lead role. This is the sort of character that was missing a little bit from Tron, now that I think about it. And I guess with this being at number 6 on today's ranking, that we have 5 more films till number 1. Number 1. No, I'm not going to put you through that. I'm also a big Friday the 13th fan. I just got done reviewing this one actually a couple of months ago. So if you want to hear my full thoughts on it, then check that out. It's available in my Friday the 13th playlist. But I will quickly say here that this has got a great Jason, some fun kills, fun characters. It all takes place in a cool location at Higgins Haven. There's not a whole lot wrong with part 3, in all honesty. It's good, solid, early era Jason Voorhees. This is the highest placed film today, which I've just got done watching for the first time. And honestly, this film really surprised me. I'd heard that only the first Amityville film was good, and then after that it's just a slow descent into pure mediocrity with all the countless sequels. But I found part 2 actually better than 1, and I really enjoyed 1. I put this on in the middle of the afternoon just because I thought to myself, I'm going to be doing my 82 ranking soon. I do want to get up to 20 movies. What else can I quickly slip in there? Look down this list of films I had. Oh, Amityville 2, probably not going to be very good, but go on then. 350 to Rent, oh, for God's sake, fine. But honestly, that hour and a half, watching it in the middle of the afternoon in daytime, which is not a traditionally great time to watch horror films. You usually watch them at night, in the dark a little bit and stuff, but I found this an absolutely compelling story. The family in this film are just so much more interesting than the family from the first film. I'm not fully read up on all the stuff that actually happened in real life in terms of Amityville, so the things that happen in this story mostly surprised me. I didn't know what was coming, and all the way up to the end, I just didn't know what was going to happen next. I really thoroughly enjoyed this, and I'm absolutely going to add this to my shelf alongside part 1. I don't know how things are going to go after this. I presume that the quality is going to dip, otherwise this would be a more respected series than it is. But yeah, part 2, really good, thoroughly enjoyed it. I have lots of weird opinions when it comes to movies, but Star Trek is one of those times when I go with the general consensus and agree that Wrath of Khan is the best in the franchise. I haven't seen all of the more modern ones, but I've seen all of the ones involving the original crew, 1 to 6, and for my money, Wrath of Khan is absolutely the best. I love the showdown between Kirk and Khan in this film. Watching Kirk lose his rag over the radio with Khan on several occasions is just a sight to behold. I like the fact that the film doesn't give them a cheesy punch up in the last sort of 10 or 15 minutes. They never meet in this film, those two characters. The whole thing plays out a bit like a submarine battle in space. I think the characterization of Kirk and the crew in this film is absolutely spot on. There are so many good character moments. The death of Spock at the end is very emotional. This whole film is just such a great sci-fi adventure. I absolutely love it, but it hasn't made the grand final. It's only come third, and the fact that it hasn't quite made it tells me that probably no Star Trek film will. If one of the other ones gets to the final, I'll be very surprised. But it's time to find out what two films did pip Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan. So let's start with number 2. I think most people will agree that this is a more than worthy film to go through to the grand final. I first saw Blade Runner back in the 90s when it came on TV. That would have been the director's cut version. I've never seen any of the more crappy versions that apparently came out closer to release. I didn't instantly fall in love with this film, but luckily we taped it the first time it came on. So throughout the rest of my teenage years, I was able to rewatch it several times and I slowly grew to love it. Then in the noughties, I bought the Final Cut version on DVD. I didn't notice that much difference between the Final Cut version and the Director's Cut version, but given the fact that I'd grown to love the Director's Cut version by that point, it didn't really bother me that Ridley Scott hadn't changed the film that much for the Final Cut version. But this is one of his greatest achievements in my book. There's some great world building in this movie. It's not for everybody. It is a little bit of an acquired taste. Maybe for some people there's not enough action in it. I don't know. But I love the movie. I think it's a great film. And I personally believe that Deckard is actually human, regardless of what anybody else says or what the official line is. It's just a personal thing for me. When I'm watching the movie, I choose to believe he's human. But that's an entirely other issue. Right. It's time to find out what is my favourite movie which came out in the year 1982. Yep, The Thing is my number 1 for 82. This is the third time since I started doing this series that a John Carpenter film has taken the number 1 spot. Halloween won the 1978 rankings. The Fog won the 1980 rankings. I guess that makes me some kind of Carpenter acolyte. I don't know, but I love the man's style. I think he's an amazing director, or at least he was for the vast majority of the first half of his career, at least. There are so many things to enjoy in The Thing. The practical effects are amazing. I love the location. I love the character. Kurt Russell's great in this film. All the twists and surprises and developments that happen just completely take you by surprise the first time you watch the film. And it's a really rewatchable film as well, because when you watch it on repeat viewings, you're constantly trying to look for new things that you didn't spot the first time around, little things on people's faces that might give away that they're the thing. You know, my personal favourite theory that maybe other people don't have is that Fuchs fakes his own death, a character who apparently dies quite early on, but you don't actually see him die. And I kind of theorise that for the rest of the film, you just sort of see him running around in the background, desperately trying to stay away from the other characters. But there are a number of different opinions you can have about who turns at what point in the movie. It's a fascinating film to discuss with other people. So I'm a massive fan of The Thing. It is my number 1 for today. It is going through to the grand final. And we will see how it does when I finally get around to that video, probably a long way into the future, because I've got so many more years to cover before I get to 2021. Right, before I wrap up today, there is one more question left to ask. This is going to be a very short section today. I would kind of like to watch the film Cat People, because I think I might have watched it once in the 90s and really enjoyed it, but I couldn't remember enough of it to justify its inclusion today. But apart from that, in all honesty, all the films that I would have wanted to watch for 82, I went ahead and did that over the past week. So I kind of feel like this particular year is an exhausted mine as far as I'm concerned. I've taken all of the gold and diamonds and emeralds out of it, and there's nothing left to find. But if you want to give me any more recommendations for 82 that I absolutely would not have thought of, by all means leave them in the comments. But that's it. That's 82 all taken care of. I'll be back soon with a rankings for 1983. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.